Let's get into it. Sold Not For Sale podcast. Coach Colin here. We got Joe Rogan very freaked out, very scared, shocked even. I know you never see that in my titles. I know. But in this one, he actually is. He's sitting with Annie Jacobson. Am I saying that right? Jacobson, not Jacobson. She is discussing Cuba, Russian ships into Cuban waters. They're running tests. They're seeing if they can hit targets that are 300 miles away. They're doing simulations. The Pentagon says it's nothing to worry about. Anybody who knows about this knows this hasn't happened in a very long time. It's not good. They are very close to the United States of America. It is not a good thing at all. And Biden continues and continues to push the red line that Putin has warned everybody in the world about. So you're going to hear Joe Rogan and Annie talk about this subject. After that, I'm going to play a little bit of the breakdown news-wise so you guys get a clearer picture of this whole thing other than just Joe and the guest talking about it. Then I'm going to move on to play some words from Vladimir Putin himself in regards to who he feels could fix this whole Ukraine-Russia situation. And spoiler alert, he's on my shirt right now, that gentleman. And then some words from Donald J. Trump himself, your future 47th president. Let's get into it.
I mean, like, okay, here's an example. We haven't even talked about submarines, but the submarines are completely, you cannot find them in the sea. They are stealth beyond stealth. I interviewed the former commander of the nuclear subforces, a guy called Admiral Connor. Never given an interview like this before. And I said, like, how hard is it to find a nuclear-armed sub? And he said, Annie, it's easier to find a grapefruit-sized object in space than a nuclear sub under the sea.
Jesus.
And these things are, by the way, I have a map in the back of the book that shows you how close our adversaries, enemies, call them what you will, China and Russia, how close they come to the East Coast and the West Coast of the United States regularly, which means it reduces that launch time I told you about of 26 minutes, 40 seconds. That reduces it down to sort of 10 minutes or less.
What did you think when you saw the Soviet subs that were outside of Cuba?
I thought, wow. I mean, when I began reporting this book a couple years ago, never did I think that I would see that while I was talking about my book with people like you after publication. Never, but in the same manner, I never thought I would hear the president of Russia threatening to use a nuclear weapon. I mean, he said he's not kidding that he might use WMD. That was his paraphrased quote.
Did he specify, like, in what way?
He just said WMD.
Against America?
Yeah. Well, you know, having to do with intervention in Ukraine.
Yeah. I'm sure you saw the drones that blew up on a beach. The bombs that were launched that killed civilians in Russia. They were U.S. You didn't see this?
Was this like recently, yesterday? No, I did not.
Jamie, see if you can find that. But Russian civilians, including one young girl they were showing in this article, were killed by these cluster bombs that were launched by drones that are ours. You know, that Ukraine has, and now they launched them on Russian civilians. And it's like, here it is. Crimea video shows Russian tourists flee beach. What is that word? ATACMS? Bomblets rain down. What does that mean? Do you know what that means? ATACMS?
Well,
They're going to go into a quick ad, so I'm just going to skip over that ad.
I'm guessing they're
Now,
small.
This is a very interesting situation because You have not seen stuff like this in a very, very long time. There's the ad. I'm going to skip over this real quick. I have not seen anything like this in a very long time. And I have to say, beyond everything, because it is a matter of life and death, but you do have to say this is something that Biden put into play, or the people who are behind him pulling the strings. This is 100% in his hands to stop. Just like the border was in his hands to stop, and he kept saying, no, 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 you got to pass this bill for $60 billion to Ukraine. He just routinely acts like things are out of his hands completely when he is the president of the United States of America, sadly. Let's get back to this clip. Let me unmute this.
Make that larger so I can read the whole thing, Jimmy. The video shows the beach in Sevastopol, Crimea, which was struck by a series of explosions on June 23rd. The footage captured by a security camera shows hundreds of people beginning to run away from the water before the impact of cluster warhead starts.
What's happening in Ukraine is so profoundly dangerous for everyone.
So this is the scene right here. So these things just drop down on the water. I mean, it's pure terrorism.
Well, it's also remarkable that we have so much available footage and so much citizen journalism that people can see these events and discuss them.
So it says here the event was caused by Russian air defenses shooting down a series of cluster warhead missiles, one of which altered course as a result. The Russian Ministry of Defense said that 4 of the 5 missiles launched were shot down, adding another missile as a result of the impact of air defense systems at the final stage, deviated from the flight path with the warhead exploding in the air over the city. The detonation of the fragmentation warhead of the 5th American missile in the air led to numerous casualties among civilians in Sevastopol. What was? Do we know what this was about? Where they were launching them towards?
I don't know. I'm not following the ground war in Ukraine right now, as with my focus on this. But what I do know is that the ratcheting up of the rhetoric and the use of third-party weapon systems is complicating an already incredibly volatile situation.
It says a spokesperson for the U.S. State Department denied the accusations, saying that the claims were ridiculous and hyperbolic. The U.S. supplies weapons to Ukraine in the ongoing war with Russia and recognizes Crimea as a part of Ukraine despite Russia's annexation. Ukraine has previously outlined plans to use long-range weapons supplied by America in Crimea, specifically to target infrastructure supporting the Russian invasion. Oof. This is just terrifying stuff. It's terrifying because it can all be happening while you're just going about your business, walking your dog. You have no idea that the entire world is in grave danger.
You mean if things suddenly go nuclear?
Yeah. Well, even just like these escalations.
Well, I think the big picture that frightens me most is that when we see the president of Russia going to the president of North Korea, our 2 air quotes arch enemies right now, having a new alliance. And then I consider that the current president of the United States hasn't spoken to the president of Russia in 2 years. And I think back to that time in history, what's known as the Reagan reversal, where Reagan went from this incredible hawk to learning about nuclear weapons in, of all things, an ABC television movie called The Day After, having the crap scared out of him, and then realizing, this is the president of the United States, realizing we cannot continue on this path. It is too dangerous. And that is why Reagan reached out to Gorbachev, and that's why we have the Reykjavik summit. It was called the Reagan reversal. So in other words, my point is, Reagan, who, the axis of evil speech, like this idea of seeing your enemy as the arch evil villain, had to change for him when he understood nuclear war by seeing a film. And so when I look to today and I consider that the current president isn't speaking to the president of Russia, it doesn't make any sense to someone like me. That's probably why I wrote this book. Like, please understand this. And one has to imagine that the current president, with all his decades in office, understands all of this. And so I don't fundamentally understand why there is no communication. It is way too dangerous. Hence what you just showed us, and the facts will come in of whose weapon systems those are. But either way, the perception, to your point, the fact that a misperception could ignite nuclear war, could ignite that situation that is unreversible, that should be astonishing to all of us.
It's terrifying.
Well, it's terrifying, but the one hopeful part of it would be, again, going back to the Reagan. The Reagan reversal, by the way, is the only glimmer of hope I ever found in all of this.
Don't you think, though, that politics in general, and certainly world leadership, especially United States leadership, is much more compromised today than it was then? And a guy like Reagan doesn't really exist today.
Tell me what you mean when you say compromised.
I mean, the military defense contractors are making so much money, and they want to continue making so much money. And they have great influence over the politicians and over policy and over what gets done. And this money that they don't want to stop making is completely dependent upon the continuing to build, continuing to sell, continuing to have these weapons and future systems and more advanced systems and better systems. And there's so much money and momentum behind this that I don't know if there's a Reagan available now. I don't know if that's an option. If there's a person that can have some sense, that can say that we are on a path to self-destruction and we need to stop and we need to reverse this path.
Literally what Trump has been saying the whole time. The entire time, CNN town hall, when they're like, who do you want to win? And he's like, I want people to stop dying. This needs to stop. The numbers of Ukrainian people who have passed away, sadly, from this war is being underreported. Trump's been saying this since the day it started. He's like, this needs to stop right away. So it's so funny that Joe's saying, he's like, I don't think there's a person. Maybe he's just like stricken with fear right now. I don't know. But, you can look at it. And especially when you bring up defense contractors. Trump spoke out against defense contractors. He said they want me to keep going to war so they can keep making money. He's like, and I will not go to war. He said this during his administration. He was like, they don't like me because I don't want war and I won't have wars. He goes, so they don't make as much money. He said this. So he is the guy who could definitely stop this. And it's not just me that thinks this. Putin thinks this as well. Now, some quick things to just touch on. The fact that Biden hasn't spoke to Putin in 2 years, that is not something that I knew. And it honestly goes to my next point here that I have written down. He definitely understands, away from all the things that we know that are obviously wrong with him, somebody in the administration understands that going through with this is terrible. Going through with everything they've gone through, all of the money and all of the Putin saying, hey, no NATO. And then Kamala's like, they're going to join NATO. And then all of this stuff. They know that that's a problem. They know somebody wants this. And going to what Joe said, without Trump being there, who would want this? Well, the defense people. And also, if anybody's, I don't know. Nobody knows where all this money goes. Some of it goes through the U.S. economy, admittedly. There is some, but nobody knows where it goes once it goes to Ukraine. If somebody's on the take, that person wants it, but also the defense contractors want it, obviously. So this is a very interesting time, man. And this actually is a very scary situation. I'm not much to give in to things like this happening and then me living in fear. I'm not much for that. but I can definitely see the importance of what's going on right now. So let's play this just to give you guys a deeper context of what's going on.
It is a scene reminiscent out of the Cold War, and the message, well, it couldn't be any clearer.
Yeah, 3 Russian warships and a nuclear-powered submarine arrived in Cuba a few hours ago. They're taking part in planned military exercises in the Caribbean, but the real goal is essentially a projection of strength by Russia on the world stage. It's being very closely watched by the US, and it comes amid rising tensions between Washington and Moscow over, of course, the war in Ukraine.
Yeah, CNN's Patrick Ottman joins us now live from Havana. Patrick, this could be a conversation reminiscent of something we would have been discussing decades ago, and yet here we are. The U.S., we know, has been monitoring these ships very closely. Talk about the significance of it. The U.S. intelligence doesn't believe that these ships are armed with nuclear weapons. Nonetheless, just 90 miles off of the coast of Florida.
Just 90 miles off the coast of Florida and only about 50 yards from where I'm standing. Right behind me there are the 4 Russian naval ships that came into the port of Havana this morning. The ship directly behind me is a rescue ship, an icebreaker, which does not have much use in the Caribbean. And then behind that is a nuclear-powered sub, the Kazan, something Cubans say they've never seen before in this country, a nuclear-powered submarine coming in for all to witness into the port of Havana, really something quite unusual. And then behind is the Gorshkov, which is one of the most modern military ships capable of firing cruise missiles that Vladimir Putin possesses, really highest level technology that the Russian Navy can boast. So those are for all to see. They are docked in an area a few years ago you would have seen American cruise ships, but because of U.S. sanctions, they're no longer allowed to come here. And right before we came on air, I could hear the sailors singing the Russian national anthem. So it certainly felt like a moment from the past. You know, it wasn't that long ago, of course, that the Soviet Union was supplying Cuba with everything they needed here, and the economy was doing much, much better as a result. We have seen some of that come back over the last few years with the war in Ukraine, where Vladimir Putin, in exchange for Cuban support in that war, has sent more oil here, more food. There are a lot more Russian tourists here these days, and that is helping Cuba as the economy is really in some of the worst stage that it has been in decades. Literally, Russian oil, in many instances, is keeping the lights on when they are on here. Because for much of the time, there are nationwide blackouts taking place. So Cuba has increasingly voiced its support for Vladimir Putin's invasion in Ukraine, and Vladimir Putin has returned the favor. Certainly striking to see the ships here behind me, armed with nuclear weapons or not, so close to the United States.
Yeah, and just obviously, yes, very alarming. But just in terms of what Cuba has said about this, Patrick, Cuba's essentially saying, look, this is standard practice. We do this frequently with countries that are sort of friendly to Cuba in terms of their own naval units. And as you pointed out, Cuba also saying that, look, there are no nuclear weapons on board the ship. There's absolutely no threat whatsoever. But still, talk us through how closely the U.S. Navy is watching this.
Well, the U.S. Navy essentially escorted them into Cuban waters as the ships, while they were in international waters, were essentially skirting the coast of Florida. So certainly they're watching them now. They will be keeping an eye on them if they depart from here and go to another U.S. adversary, the country of Venezuela. You know, the U.S. has naval maneuvers around the globe as well. They certainly have a much more active Navy right now than Russia's. So this is something these countries do. They keep a distance from another as they shadow one another's ships, and there's a certain amount of professionalism there. And yes, it's true that many other countries send their Navy ships here on friendly visits, such as this one. They allow the Cuban public sometimes to board their ships, as we expect to take place later on in the week here with the ships behind me. But of course, the relationship that Cuba had with Russia for so many years during the Cold War is very, very different from those relationships. No other nation in the world has based nuclear warheads here. No other nation in the world was so supportive of Cuba. Cuba was essentially a client state of the USSR for many, many years. And you hear Russian officials saying that they want to invest more in Cuba, that they want to help the Cuban economy grow. But they also sometimes lament that Cuba remains a communist-run state and Russia is not anymore. So even the Russians, despite the years of that close relationship, have trouble making anything happen in Cuba these days, which really says a lot about Cuba's economy and the entrenched bureaucracy here. But Cuban officials saying that simply U.S. sanctions have pushed them back into the arms of their old ally. But of course, the economy in Russia certainly is very different these days. Russia no longer able to finance Cuba as it once did.
Wow. Wow. Oh, man. Just what one presidency does, man. A bunch of people looking for inclusivity and more. I'm not even going to get into it. But you guys know, more wokeness, more woke ideology. I'll just leave it at that. Wanting to get away from the mean tweets. Oh, the mean tweets. Oh, they were too much. He just says things. Oh, I don't like the way he walks. Oh, his hands. I don't like his hands. I don't like his temperament. Yeah, there you go. This is what happens when you don't like somebody's temperament. Then you go voting for Biden. Oh, man. Right back into the arms of Russia. But at least Russia can't finance them on the level that they used to. But, how much money does Cuba really need if there is going to be any kind of financing? I could see Russia doing the same thing that China has been doing with Africa, which is coming in, being like, let us build a couple things here. Let us help you there. You'll pay us back. You'll pay us back by pretty much we're going to take over little parts of your land very slowly. We're going to ship some of our people in. It's too bad. Really too bad. But again, these are just tests, but it just looks, especially at this point in time, it looks crazy. At this point in time, after all these things have happened to Russia by Ukraine because of the US, and then all of a sudden these ships come in, it looks terrible. It looks absolutely terrible. Oh, man. I don't know why the US doesn't just, I don't want to say snuggle up to Cuba, but they are communists, so it's hard to abide by the whole communist regime thing, but I don't know. At least make it so they're telling Russia to go somewhere else with these ships. Like, how hard is it to you don't want to placate Cuba, but how hard is it to at least build a relationship with Cuba? I don't know. Absolutely ridiculous. I mean, if Russia can do it, why can't the US, right? But again, you got Biden in office. He hasn't spoken to Putin. Obviously not speaking to Cuba at all. What else do I got here? Oh, and then they're at the coast of Florida, which is always worrisome. But if they're at Cuba, they're very close to Florida, of course. I mean, my grandmother literally swam from Cuba, and grandfather, I believe, as well, swam from Cuba over to Florida. It's just the way it is. On a raft. That's the story that I think, because I can't see them getting over any other way. Maybe a boat, maybe. I don't know, but they're Florida people, or at least grandma was at least Florida people. But let's get into this a little bit. Got a lot of family in Florida. Let's read a little bit of what Putin is saying. He's saying, especially since the U.S. remains a great power with known capabilities. Okay, let me just go through this. This is him talking about the whole situation here. He's like in the field of economy, security, and military affairs. And the U.S. is a permanent member of the what do you say there? Permanent member of the United Nations Security Council. Of course, it has influence on the situation in Ukraine. And of course, we care about what is happening there. Well, this is their, in fact, internal affair. He's very aware. You could tell he's very angry about what's going on, especially since he had an agreement with the Ukraine, and the current administration aided Ukraine in breaking that agreement and resisting them. It's just so bad. You know that Mr. Trump, as a presidential candidate, declares that he is ready Just going through this. And wants to stop the war in Ukraine. We take this quite seriously. Of course, I am not familiar, of course, with his possible proposal on what he plans to do, on how he plans to do this. And this, of course, is the key question. But I have no doubt that he is saying this sincerely, and we support this. Interesting how, and I'll play that once again for you guys in case you guys just want to listen to it in Russian and you want to read this. I mean, turn on your captions here.
Безопасности постоянной. Конечно, такое влияние имеет на ситуацию на Украине. Конечно, они безразличны, что там происходит. Но это их, собственно, внутреннее дело. Вы знаете, то, что господин Трамп, как кандидат в президенты, заявляет о том, что он готов и хочет остановить войну на Украине, мы к этому относимся вполне серьезно. Я не знаком, разумеется, с его возможными предложениями по поводу того, как он собирается это сделать. И это, конечно, ключевой вопрос. Но я не сомневаюсь, что он говорит это искренне, и мы это поддерживаем.
So, very serious about this. Obviously, he understands Trump's very serious about it. And it's just very interesting that he is open to a solution. And yet the Biden administration keeps talking about how he is not open to a solution. Zelensky keeps talking about how he is not open to a solution. Everybody has demonized him, and I'm not saying he's a great guy, but I will say that he was standing right there saying he's open to the possibility of stopping this whole thing, depending on what Trump actually brings to the table. And it's just, that alone should be taking Biden supporters over to Trump's side. Because Trump wants to solve it, and the guy who's both sides, the guy who could bring people into World War III on a very real level is saying, I'm willing to stop. And Biden's like, oh no, we can't stop. Actually, I got to give him more. I think he just said something about another $225 million. It's just, how is it that we're still sounding conspiratorial when we say that this administration wants this? They obviously want this to be happening. It's you're not speaking to the guy. You're enabling this country to resist this guy. You're aiding them in breaking agreements that they agreed to. And then you're giving them billions of dollars of taxpayer money. And your economy's going crazy, inflation's going crazy. Like, how this is the border, it's just so crazy to me that he's allowing this. Let's end this off with a little bit of Trump talking about this, as he has so many times. Let's go.
Peace through strength. Russia would have never attacked Ukraine, would have never done it. Putin and I get along fine. We get along very well. That's a good thing, not a bad thing. The fake news, if the fake news would become real and honest news, 90% of our problems in this country would be solved. They would be solved. So Russia would have never attacked. Israel would have never been attacked. The Ukraine situation is so horrible. The Israeli situation is so horrible, what's happened. And we're going to get them solved. We're going to get them solved very fast. I actually said Ukraine. I know President Putin very well. I know Zelensky very well. I'm going to get him in. We're going to get it solved very quickly. Should have never happened. Would have never happened. Now you have all that death, far greater than people understand. The numbers are far, far greater than anybody would even think possible. You're going to find that out in the years to come. When they knock down these massive buildings in Ukraine, and then you see they announced 2 people were slightly wounded. No, many people were killed. Many people were killed. We're going to get it stopped. But it's so sad because it should have never started. People killed and a culture destroyed. You can never replace 1,000-year-old buildings with the most beautiful golden domes and churches and everything, just all rubble now.
Also, I'm just saying, some of the churches in Ukraine that were kind of shut down were due to the actual administration that's in charge right now in Ukraine. They actually made sure to shut down those churches. And the whole thing going on with Christians over there, I don't know if you know. But there you go. Trump's talking about it. He wants to solve it. Putin wants to solve it. Thank God Biden is in the condition that he's in. Thank God he can't debate. Thank God so many people are starting to see what we've all seen for so long. Trump gets to step in. It's pretty much going to be a landslide. It doesn't matter who they bring in. And I'm starting to actually learn that I don't even think it's possible for them to bring in a Newsom or a Michelle Obama. I don't even think that's possible for them to do. It has to be Biden or Kamala. Either way, he is going to dominate them. So we get President Trump back, and hopefully this can all stop, because that situation where you're seeing ships very close to Florida, very close to the United States of America, just the fact that countries are feeling brazen enough to do things like this is not a good sign. Peace through strength is something that Trump has talked about so many times. Get over the mean tweets, people. Get over the temperament. Get over the name calling. It's what he does. But then he also goes out into the world in front of other world leaders and he puts them in line. There's not one that you can think of during his administration that he either wasn't laughing with or put them in their place. That's what you want in a leader. I can't possibly imagine why people want Biden in office. It's crazy. Absolutely crazy. Hasn't talked to Putin in 2 years because he can't. Because he can't. Because if Putin saw him, Putin would be like, maybe I should be president. It's ridiculous. Anyways, guys, we're at like 31 minutes here. That's a bit too much. Like, subscribe, turn on the notifications. Other than that, I'm out. Vote Trump.